Jacob always trusted his wife, but her unexpected meetings with friends, frequent visits to a hotel, and secretive behavior made him question everything. One evening, he decided to follow her and saw something that shattered his heart. What started as an innocent dinner quickly turned into something far more intimate. Will Jacob uncover the truth, or will this be the end of their marriage? I caught my wife red-handed, but her explanation shocked me even more. Jacob had just returned from a 2-day business trip. He felt exhausted after long hours on the plane, but his excitement to be back home with Emma outweighed his fatigue. He expected her to welcome him as she always did, with a warm smile and a cup of tea that seemed to melt away his worries. But something was off this time. As soon as he stepped through the door, he noticed a change in the house's usual comforting atmosphere. "Emma, I'm home," he called out as he entered the room, but the response he got was muted. "Hi," came her cold reply from the other end of the room. She was sitting on the couch with her phone in hand, not even glancing at him. Jacob couldn't figure out why she seemed so distant. It wasn't like her. Approaching her, he noticed the fatigue on her face. Not physical, but emotional. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. His eyes fell to her hands clutching the phone. "Yes, everything's fine," she answered flatly, her attention glued to the screen. This behavior was uncharacteristic for Emma. Normally, she prioritized him, always radiating warmth and attentiveness. Jacob began to feel uneasy. Instead of finding solace after a long day, he was met with a wall of indifference. But he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps she was just having an off day. He decided to give her space, hoping things would return to normal by morning. The next day, Jacob noticed more unsettling changes. Emma avoided his gaze whenever he tried to talk to her. She spent more time with her friends, offering flimsy excuses to avoid staying at home. Though it felt odd, he tried not to overthink it. That evening, his suspicions deepened. When Jacob came home after work, Emma was nowhere to be found. Hours passed as he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. His worry turned into dread. When Emma finally came home, she seemed unusually energetic, almost glowing, but her demeanor was distant. It was the first time Jacob felt something was seriously wrong. "Where were you, Emma?" he asked as she walked in. "I was with Kevin. We were training." "I told you it's important for my career," she replied calmly, but something in her eyes seemed off. Jacob couldn't pinpoint what it was, but the unease lingered. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" he pressed, watching her closely. "Sorry, I was busy and didn't hear them," she said dismissively, her tone too casual. Jacob's chest tightened. The cold, detached way she spoke was unlike her, and it made him feel like a stranger in his own home. Jacob had worked as a financial consultant for years. His career was stable, and he earned enough to provide a comfortable life for himself and Emma, whom he adored from the moment they met. She was his rock and his joy, but lately, something had shifted. His once perfect life seemed threatened by more than just routine marital hiccups. Emma was a freelancer pursuing a career in beauty. She dreamed of becoming a beauty blogger, dedicating her days to training and art classes to hone her skills. She loved working out and spent considerable time at the gym. Her life seemed carefree and full of inspiration. Jacob supported her wholeheartedly, paying for her expenses and helping her chase her dreams. They spent a lot of time together, and he believed their bond was unbreakable. But one evening shattered his peace. While checking his email in his home office, a message from Emma popped up on his phone. It was a photo of her and Kevin, her trainer. They stood smiling in the gym, but Kevin seemed too close to her shoulder for comfort. Jacob stared at the photo, his heart sinking. He couldn't decide what bothered him more, the image itself, or the fact that she had sent it. Something about it screamed that their relationship was more than just professional. Moments later, another message from Emma arrived. "Jacob, it's just a picture. Nothing more. I sent it by accident. Don't worry." The unease in Jacob's chest turned into a gnawing certainty that their once perfect marriage was no longer as unshakable as it seemed. But the more he read her words, the more he felt that her explanation sounded implausible. Why did she send him that specific photo, and why now, when he was so far away? Anxiety enveloped him, and he couldn't shake the feeling. Jacob sat with his phone clutched tightly in his hands. He didn't want to believe the worst, but at the same time, he felt this might be the beginning of something significant. She was his wife, and he could never have imagined that she would betray him, especially with a trainer he barely even knew. Over the next few hours, Jacob decided to check her other messages. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emma wasn't being entirely honest with him. He began examining her social media, looking into her online activity. All those little details that once seemed normal now raised suspicions. Her constant gym selfies, her training sessions with Kevin that seemed increasingly intimate, all began to weigh on him. He even noticed how often Kevin appeared in her posts and how they interacted in the comments. Something about it all felt off. Jacob realized he couldn't continue to stay in the dark. His feelings of betrayal weren't yet substantiated by facts, but he couldn't find peace. He decided to start keeping track of her movements, not out of mistrust, but because he needed to make sense of the situation that wouldn't leave him alone. The next day, Jacob watched as Emma headed to the gym again. He decided to leave for work earlier than usual, ostensibly to get some things done, but in reality, he just couldn't leave things unanswered. Questions swirled in his mind, and he needed some clarity. When he came home that evening, she wasn't there again. Jacob started to feel that her behavior was growing even more distant. He decided it was time to find some real evidence. This time, he didn't wait for another random message. He decided to be proactive. Jacob began checking not only her social media but also her messages in various apps, focusing on her conversations with Kevin. Jacob had access to Emma's accounts, though he rarely used it. At that moment, he realized there might be more to this than just workouts. Her careful exchanges with Kevin seemed too strange, and Jacob felt that something wasn't right. He could no longer ignore the sense that something was amiss. Now Jacob was ready to get answers, no matter what he had to do. Emma had always been an enigma to Jacob. His love for her was boundless, and he was always willing to support her in any of her endeavors. At first, he didn't pay much attention to the little things, to her hobbies that sometimes drew her away from him, because he believed they were simply phases of personal growth that everyone goes through. Sports, painting, new courses, these were all important to her, and Jacob was genuinely happy for her achievements. But lately, he had started noticing that Emma was becoming more and more distant. Their evenings had changed. Her time was divided between filming for her blog, art classes, and training sessions with Kevin, who seemed to matter more to her than he did. Jacob had tried to talk to her more than once, but there was always a reason to postpone the conversation. This worried him because, with each passing day, he felt that his presence in her life was becoming less and less significant. But Jacob already felt something was wrong. Emma's words didn't convince him. He knew that things like this don't just happen out of nowhere. A sense of unease crept into his heart, making him think there was more to this situation than met the eye. The next day, he decided not to question her anymore. Instead, he began carefully observing her actions, looking for inconsistencies. He started paying attention to how often she went to art classes with Adam and trained with Kevin. In the evenings, when he was home, she was often absent, either filming videos for social media or working on a new painting. A few days later, Jacob got an unexpected opportunity. Emma organized a party and invited Kevin, Adam, and a few other friends. Feeling like an outsider at the event, Jacob couldn't help but notice how she interacted with them. Kevin and Adam were a bit closer to her than he had anticipated. They laughed and discussed things together, and Jacob couldn't ignore how their glances alternated between Emma and him. Emma seemed completely oblivious to his concerns. She was engrossed in conversations with her friends, while Kevin and Adam seemed to be growing closer to her with every passing moment. Jacob felt like a third wheel. Every time she laughed with them, he felt awkward. The more he observed them, the more convinced he became that there was something deeper between them than just friendship. He couldn't understand why these two men had become so important in her life. "You don't seem to enjoy these kinds of parties, Jay. Why do you look so gloomy tonight?" one of the guests asked, commenting on the atmosphere of the gathering. "Nothing in particular, it's just not really my thing," he replied, but inside, his heart was pounding with anxiety. That night, he couldn't sleep. He felt an impending unpleasant truth looming over him, one he was yet to uncover. and the thought wouldn't let him rest. Jacob knew he had to figure out what was going on between his wife and her trainer, as well as the artist. He could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening. His intuition told him this wasn't a coincidence, and he would have to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. From the next day, he began acting cautiously. He became more attentive to her every move. It was crucial to him not to appear suspicious, so he tried to remain as calm as possible, even though his heart ached with doubt. He decided that if something was indeed happening, he needed to see it with his own eyes. If everything he felt was true, he would have to make a difficult choice. With each passing day, Jacob increasingly felt like his world was changing. His wife, Emma, was becoming more distant. Just a few weeks ago, she had been the center of his life, and now she was a mystery he couldn't solve. She seemed to be spending more and more time outside the house, at workouts, painting, and with friends. With Kevin and Adam in particular, Jacob began to notice how their meetings became more frequent, and each time he felt his place in her life being pushed aside. The more Jacob tried to find out, the more he encountered her excuses. Her face, when she spoke, grew colder, and her gaze more detached. She no longer shared her thoughts with him as she used to, no longer asked about his day. She was simply there, as if absent-mindedly, and it tormented him. It all started with little things. Her new habits. She was no longer the same woman he had once fallen in love with. In the mornings, when they got up together, Jacob noticed how she spent more time in front of the mirror while he rushed to work. Emma, who used to wear makeup so rarely, now applied it even for her workouts. Her lips were bright red with lipstick, and her facial expressions looked entirely different, more seductive, less natural. Jacob didn't understand why. She had always been so simple, so beautiful in her natural state. Now, every time she left the house, he couldn't help but notice her outfits, revealing, very revealing, even for the gym. "Why do you need all these vulgar things?" Jacob asked one day when he noticed another new purchase, black lace panties she had hidden in her bag. "I don't know. I just like them." "Maybe it's part of self-expression," she replied, but her words carried a cold indifference. Jacob couldn't figure out what was going on. One thing was clear. There was a massive rift between them, and it wasn't just a phase that could be ignored. Over time, he started noticing other changes as well. Emma became more silent. Whenever he tried to talk to her about something important, she literally avoided conversations, running away from him when he wanted to discuss their relationship, and it deeply worried him. So, one evening, after a hard day at work, Jacob decided to talk to her. He wasn't sure if he would get answers to his questions, but he could no longer stay silent. He needed at least to try to understand what was happening. "Emma, how are you? How's the gym? How's painting?" He started the conversation, trying to remain calm. "Everything's great, Jay. I really love it," she replied without looking up from her phone, which she held in her hands. "Don't you think we've grown apart lately?" he asked, carefully watching her reaction. Emma put her phone on the table and looked at him, but her gaze was detached. "No, Jay. You're probably just tired. You need to relax more. Take some time off," she replied, but there was none of the warmth in her voice that he remembered. Jacob felt the chill in her words even more. It became clear to him that she either didn't want to or couldn't speak openly with him. This started to scare him. What was she hiding? What was really going on between her and her trainer, Kevin? And what didn't he know about her relationship with Adam? He began to notice that she spent even more time with them, and not just during workouts or painting classes. She started communicating with them more on social media, posting pictures with them. When he asked about it, she once again offered only excuses that sounded overly convoluted. Jacob was no longer sure that this was all just coincidence. One day, when he entered her room to grab his belongings, he noticed a note on the table with numbers on it. Her handwriting was not her usual. It was too uneven, as if written in haste. Jacob picked up the note and looked at it. It seemed like some sort of plan. It resembled a schedule of meetings, or even a meeting location. His heart pounded. He realized he could no longer postpone the conversation with Emma. He needed to know the truth. The next day, Jacob tried to talk to Emma again. He couldn't forget the note he found, and the question wouldn't let him rest. He hoped that this time she would at least be honest with him, but when he brought up the topic, Emma simply came up with a new excuse. Emma, I found your note. Can you explain to me what this plan is? He started, looking her directly in the eyes. She shrugged as if there was nothing unusual about the situation. Oh, Jay, it's just a promotional campaign for my blog. I thought you already knew. It's for social media posts. All those meetings, they're part of my content, she replied, averting her gaze. Jacob tried to keep his composure, but his heart was racing. He couldn't fully believe her, but he still didn't have enough evidence to accuse her. The whole situation remained unclear, and his intuition told him she was hiding more than she let on. Are you serious? That's all you're going to say? You've been distancing yourself from me for a while now, and now this? Am I just supposed to take everything at face value? Jacob asked, trying not to lose control of his emotions. Emma looked slightly irritated. Jay, I don't know why you're so worried. Just relax a bit. Everything will be fine. You trust me, right? She said, trying to steer the conversation in a different direction. But Jacob felt that none of it was true. He couldn't just let it go. Something inside him told him that she wasn't being honest. He understood that he couldn't simply sit idly by and wait for the situation to resolve itself. The next few days were a real test for Jacob. He noticed how Emma spent more and more time with Kevin and Adam. While her relationships with them once seemed purely professional, now he began to notice subtle hints of something more. They often exchanged glances, and her behavior grew increasingly flirtatious and playful when she was around them. Jacob felt that something was happening between them, something he couldn't control. One evening, when Jacob returned home from work, he found that Emma was no longer there. On his phone, he saw a message from her. I'm with Kevin and Adam, at training. See you later. Again, them? Why them? Jacob thought, wondering why she couldn't spend time with him instead of others. He couldn't take it anymore. He decided to find out what was really going on. He wouldn't be Jacob if he didn't start investigating. That evening, he snuck up to the gym where Emma often met with Kevin and Adam. He didn't want to be seen, so he stood off to the side, watching their behavior. Emma was wearing a bright sports top that accentuated her toned figure. Kevin stood close by, his hand instinctively sliding over her shoulder as he explained an exercise. Jacob felt his heart clench. This was more than just training. There was something more between them. He saw Kevin smile, and Emma's laughter was too warm, too intimate for it to be just a workout. As Jacob was about to leave to avoid drawing attention to himself, he overheard part of their conversation. Do you really want me to help you with this project? Adam said, and Jacob noticed how his hand casually squeezed hers. We can do it together. It'll be great. Emma silently nodded, her face slightly flushed. Of course, Adam. I'd really appreciate your help, she said, her voice sounding as though it wasn't just about work but something more personal. Jacob couldn't believe his ears. He felt his heart fill with pain and disappointment. Something much bigger was happening behind his back, and he could no longer turn a blind eye. The next day, after seeing them together, Jacob confronted Emma again. He could no longer remain silent or tolerate her excuses. Emma, I saw you yesterday with Kevin and Adam. Could it be that there's something more than just friendship between you? His voice was calm, but his eyes revealed what he felt, fear and pain. Emma hesitated for a moment. Her face turned serious. Jay, you don't understand. It's not what you think, she said, but her voice was unsteady. We're just friends, you know that. Kevin is my trainer, Adam is an artist. We've been going to the gym together. I really value them. They're helping me. That's all. But Jacob was no longer listening to her. He realized that none of it mattered anymore. Whatever she said, he could no longer trust her 100%. In the evenings, Emma began leaving the house more frequently for meetings with Kevin and Adam. Jacob noticed that her outings were becoming unusually long and that her explanations were increasingly vague. She often refused to explain why her time was so extended, claiming she was working on her projects or spending time training. However, Jacob could no longer stay calm. With each passing day, he felt more alienated from his wife. His suspicions grew stronger, and even the atmosphere at home became tense. He decided he couldn't just sit and wait anymore. One evening, when Emma went out for another meeting, Jacob got ready and followed her. He decided that this time he had to see for himself what was happening. When he arrived at the location, he parked his car in a dark corner and quietly got out. His heart raced as he saw Emma enter a small cafe with Kevin and Adam. Their voices carried to him, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. So, he decided to get closer. At first, he stood quietly at a distance, observing them from behind the corner of the building, but then something compelled him to move nearer. The cafe was dimly lit, with only a few occupied tables. Jacob found a spot where he could safely watch them. After a few minutes, he noticed how Adam and Kevin sat too close to Emma. They laughed, joked, and her laughter was so gentle, even slightly flirtatious. Jacob saw how Adam carefully placed his hand on hers, and she didn't pull away. He watched as their eyes met, and in that moment, Jacob felt his heart tighten with jealousy and pain. "This is just ridiculous," he whispered to himself, trying to stay calm. He had never felt so powerless. He saw Emma leaning toward Kevin and then, seemingly casually, intertwining her fingers with Adam's as they discussed something very intimate that Jacob couldn't hear. In that moment, he realized that her relationships with him had long crossed the line of simple training sessions and creative collaboration. They weren't just meeting out of professionalism or shared interests. There was undeniable chemistry between them, and it was clear even to him, despite his efforts not to jump to conclusions. He couldn't watch it any longer. The feelings of pain and betrayal began to overwhelm him, but Jacob kept his composure. After a few minutes, Jacob began to feel his heart race. He wanted to approach them, to ask everything, but he knew he couldn't do that. His anger couldn't manifest in such a way. He respected himself too much to cause a scene in public. Instead, he decided to leave the cafe, drive home, and process it all. Another night without answers, but he now knew for sure that his intuition wasn't deceiving him. In the car, Jacob looked over the messages Emma had sent him once more. She had written that she would be home late, that she was at the cafe with friends, but he already knew it was all a lie. So, when he returned home, his soul was torn between jealousy and the need to uncover the truth. When Emma returned, she looked slightly exhilarated and happy. There was nothing suspicious in her eyes, but Jacob could sense that she was doing everything to ensure he suspected nothing. "You're already home?" she asked, walking into the room and taking off her jacket. "Yes, I went out of town," Jacob replied, watching her reaction. "Oh, I didn't notice, sorry," she said, trying to act as if nothing had happened. "Out with Kevin and Adam again?" he asked, attempting to sound calm, though his voice betrayed tension. Emma paused for a moment, her face clouded over. She took a step back, as if trying to escape the question. "Yes, we were working. They're helping me with some projects, you know that," she said, trying to smile, but Jacob could see how nervous she was. Jacob pretended to believe her, but he knew she was hiding something. Why were they meeting so often? And why was she going there on his money? The day after that conversation, Jacob decided to attend one of the gatherings Adam had invited him to, just to observe their dynamic from the sidelines. Knowing it might seem strange, he decided to be discreet to avoid drawing attention. They met at a small bar where they often unwound after long days. Jacob was surprised to see not only Adam there, but also Kevin. Adam greeted Jacob with a smile, inviting him to sit down. His manners were polished, but Jacob noticed how his gaze lingered on Emma when she laughed at one of Kevin's jokes. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their relationship than mere acquaintanceship. Adam didn't show much interest in Jacob, nor did he try to lighten the mood. Instead, he acted as if Jacob were just an observer. Jacob, though trying to remain calm, couldn't stop wondering about what was happening between his wife, Kevin, and Adam. His suspicions didn't fade, and even the most innocent gatherings now seemed filled with secrets. He noticed how Adam tried to be overly charming, making slightly flirtatious jokes with Emma and always positioning himself close enough to keep her attention. This wasn't just friendship, and Jacob could feel it. Every time Adam shook Emma's hand, Jacob saw something in him that made his fists clench internally. Kevin, on the other hand, appeared more reserved. He was always polite and never crossed any lines. His interest in Emma seemed strictly tied to her workouts rather than personal relationships, but even that was enough to make Jacob feel uneasy. "Jacob, you're looking well. How are things? Everything okay?" Adam asked, though his tone was slightly too inquisitive. All good, Jacob replied, trying to be polite while feeling his eyes constantly drift back to Emma. She seemed entirely unaware of his gaze, engrossed in her conversation with Kevin. Adam sat down next to Emma, attempting to steer the conversation in a different direction, but every word he said seemed like he was searching for a moment of personal connection. Jacob increasingly focused on the interactions around him. Kevin and I are still working on some new ideas, as always. Emma has incredible potential, Adam said, turning his gaze to Jacob, but his words carried a strange undertone. That's true, Jacob agreed, unsure of how to respond. He watched as Adam leaned toward Emma, flirting with her, and how she either didn't notice or pretended not to. Kevin, meanwhile, sat silently at the other end of the table, seemingly an observer. He was composed and couldn't help but notice how hard it was for Jacob to remain calm. Though Kevin's behavior was neutral, Jacob felt he also had a role in all of this. I heard you've been busy with work again, Jacob? Emma asked, her voice sounding interested, but Jacob noticed a hidden tension in her eyes. Yes, there's a lot to do, Jacob replied, trying not to reveal his internal struggle. He knew something was off, but couldn't tell if it was his imagination or real suspicions. The evening continued, but Jacob could no longer stay in the same place. He felt as if his patience was about to snap. He already knew that there was something more between them than just collaboration. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads where every step could change everything. Once the evening ended and everyone went their separate ways, Jacob decided not to go straight home. He drove to an old park he used to enjoy walking in and began to reflect deeply. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had become an outsider in his own life. His wife, who had once been his rock, was now becoming a stranger to him. Jacob came home late, but didn't go to bed. He sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee he didn't even think about drinking. His thoughts were focused on the strange moments in the bar that he hadn't fully processed earlier. He began replaying the evening in his mind and noticed one odd detail. When Kevin first went to the restroom at the bar, Emma also left shortly after. Then, when Kevin returned, Emma didn't come back immediately, but Adam left for the restroom instead. It wasn't until about 40 minutes later that Adam and Emma returned together. Jacob hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, as he reflected on it, dark thoughts began to creep into his mind. What if Emma was cheating on him? And what if it wasn't just with one man, but with both of them? The time Emma and Adam spent in the restroom together became a key detail he couldn't ignore. His mind swirled with questions. What could they have been doing in there for so long? Why did Kevin seem so calm and indifferent when Emma and Adam were both absent? The next morning, Jacob decided to act more decisively. He didn't bring up his suspicions with Emma. Instead, he decided to monitor her movements to gather concrete evidence. He started by installing an app on her phone to track her location and carefully reviewed her recent credit card transactions. One location caught his attention, a private hotel near Kevin's training center. So, you weren't just at training, Jacob muttered, staring at the data. After several days of observation, he noticed a clear pattern. Emma would leave the house under the pretense of training, but her route always included the same hotel. Jacob decided that this time, he would get to the bottom of it. One evening, when Emma again texted that she would be late due to her projects, Jacob discreetly followed her. He kept his distance, watching as she first stopped by the training center, where she stayed for no more than 10 minutes, and then drove straight to the hotel. His heart raced as he parked his car and watched Emma exit her vehicle and enter the building. He stayed in his car, trying to decide what to do next. At that moment, Adam appeared across the street, walking casually toward the hotel and entering through the same door. So, both of you are here. What about Kevin? Jacob thought. Within 10 minutes, another car pulled up at the entrance. Kevin got out, holding a bottle of wine. He glanced around before confidently heading into the hotel. That was the final straw. Jacob stepped out of his car and quickly walked to the hotel entrance. At the reception desk, he was greeted by a smiling woman. He decided to play it smart. Excuse me, I was supposed to meet some friends in one of the rooms, but I seem to have forgotten the room number. Could you help me? He said with a forced friendly smile. What are their names? The receptionist asked. Adam Wilson, Emma Rose, Kevin Gray, Jacob quickly replied. The woman checked her records and nodded. They're in room 304. Jacob thanked her, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the third floor. His hands trembled as he stood in the elevator. He didn't know what he would find behind the door, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. When the elevator stopped, he cautiously approached room 304. Muffled voices and laughter came from inside. Jacob leaned in closer to the door to hear better. What he heard confirmed all his worst fears. Adam, you were right. He doesn't suspect a thing, Emma laughed. Her voice was too warm for a wife, simply spending time with friends. You know, I even think he just doesn't want to know the truth, Adam replied. Maybe, but it still adds a rush of adrenaline, Kevin added to the conversation. Jacob stood frozen. His heart pounded so loudly he thought they might hear it. He didn't know what to say or do, but he couldn't just walk away. He knocked on the door. The room went silent. After a few seconds, the door opened, and Emma appeared in front of him. Her face turned pale when she saw him. Jacob? What are you doing here? She asked, trying to appear calm. Me? I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Emma? He replied coldly. Adam appeared behind Emma. Oh, Jacob, you must be misunderstanding. We're just discussing some work matters, Adam said. Work matters? At a hotel? The three of you together? I'm curious, what kind of exhibition are you planning? Jacob's voice was sharp, almost sarcastic. Emma averted her gaze, but remained silent. Her silence was worse than any confession. Kevin approached the door, maintaining his calm demeanor, and tried to intervene. Jacob, you're probably blowing things out of proportion. We're friends. Sometimes you need a change of scenery to keep the creativity flowing. Oh, creativity. That's what you're calling it now. Jacob looked at them with disdain. He knew he didn't want to hear any more explanations. You can all stay here and enjoy your creativity. I don't need anything more, he said, turning and leaving. Emma tried to call out to him, but he didn't even look back. Jacob left the hotel feeling empty. He couldn't believe this had actually happened. But now he knew the truth, and that truth nearly broke his heart. Emma returned home late at night, her expression carrying a hint of anxiety, but she tried to mask it with a smile. She found Jacob in the living room, sitting with a glass of wine and staring at the television, which was on merely as background noise. Jacob, I want to talk, she began, sitting on the couch next to him. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension in it. Really? Then explain what that was, he said curtly, not even looking in her direction. Emma sighed and started explaining. She told him she had been planning a surprise for him all along. Another gathering with their friends, but this time it was supposed to be something special. The hotel was just a place for the preparation, and they didn't want him to find out beforehand. We just wanted to do something unique for you. You've been working so hard, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for all of us to have fun together, Emma said, looking him directly in the eyes. She added, I understand why it looked suspicious, but Jacob, do you really think I could do something so terrible? She pulled out her phone and showed him messages from Adam and Kevin that genuinely discussed planning a party. The messages detailed arrangements, food, music, even various games. Jacob sighed, looking upset and guilty. Sorry, Emma. It all just looked so suspicious. I probably overreacted. She placed a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, Jacob. I just want you to trust me. He nodded, trying to smile, but inside he was still filled with doubts. Everything seemed too perfect. However, Emma was so convincing that he decided not to bring it up again, at least for now. The next few days were relatively calm, but Jacob continued to observe his wife. He noticed small details that didn't align with her explanations. Emma was spending more and more time away from home, citing creative meetings. One day, as he was driving home, he saw her with Adam, who was holding her hand as they exited an art gallery. At that point, Jacob decided to take more decisive action. He began analyzing every detail he noticed. What caught his attention was her habit of leaving her bag at Adam's studio. He decided it was time to check out that place. One evening, when Emma went out for another meeting, Jacob headed to the studio. The door was locked, but the lights inside were on. He rang the doorbell, and after a few moments, Adam opened the door. Oh, Jacob, what are you doing here? Adam looked slightly surprised but quickly composed himself. I just thought I'd stop by. Emma mentioned she left some things here. I wanted to grab them. Adam hesitated for a moment before stepping aside and letting Jacob in. She left her bag in the corner. I can get it for you. No need. I'll find it myself, Jacob said, entering the studio and glancing around. Emma's bag was on the table. He walked over, opened it, and began searching for something that might confirm or dismiss his suspicions. Among her usual belongings, cosmetics, a notebook, and a charger, he found a letter addressed to Emma. He quickly read a few lines and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The letter was from Kevin, and in it, he described his feelings for her. Is something wrong? Adam asked, standing by the door. No, everything's fine, Jacob replied, slipping the letter back into the bag. He thanked Adam and quickly left. When he got home, Jacob began piecing things together. Everything he had seen and heard over the past weeks was falling into place. He could no longer ignore the obvious. It felt like Emma was playing with his emotions, and he couldn't stand not knowing the full truth. This time, Jacob decided to test his wife thoroughly. He planned to pretend he was leaving for a few days on a work trip and see how Emma would react. Would she invite someone over to their home? Jacob was determined to uncover the entire truth. Emma appeared carefree as Jacob said goodbye to her at the door. He even left his suitcase in the car to create the impression that he was really leaving. I'll try to come back sooner if I can, he said, hugging her. Don't worry, everything will be fine. I can handle it here, Emma replied with a light smile. Jacob drove off but stopped a few blocks away, parked his car, and walked back using the neighbors' yards to remain unseen. Finding a comfortable position near the window of their living room, he prepared to observe. For the first few hours, nothing suspicious happened. Emma did some housework, talked on the phone a bit, and even cooked dinner. Jacob began to doubt his suspicions when he saw her pick up her phone and start texting someone actively. Half an hour later, a car pulled up in front of the house, and Adam stepped out. Hi. Come in, Emma said, opening the door. You're just in time. Adam looked slightly tense, but entered nonetheless. They sat at the table, talking about mundane topics as Jacob watched through the window. Shortly after, another car arrived. This time, it was Kevin. He was carrying a bottle of wine. What a crew, he said, stepping inside. I've been looking forward to an evening like this. Well, now we're all here, Emma replied, pouring wine into glasses. At first, everything seemed entirely innocent. They ate dinner, laughed, and discussed mutual interests. Jacob began to think it might just be a friendly gathering until the atmosphere started to shift. The wine loosened their tongues, and the conversation became much more intimate. You really know how to set the mood, Emma, Kevin said, leaning slightly closer to her. What would we do without you? I suppose you wouldn't be this inspired, she replied jokingly. Exactly, Adam added, giving her a look that Jacob found far too lingering. Emma laughed, but Jacob began to hear something in her laughter that felt like more than just friendly joy. Let's move to the living room, she suggested. They moved into the living room, where the atmosphere grew even more relaxed. Kevin sat closer to Emma on the couch, while Adam remained standing nearby. Jacob noticed how his wife casually touched Kevin's hand, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. You two are my rocks, she said, looking at them both. Without you, everything would be so much harder. His wife, the woman he loved and trusted with all his heart, now seemed like a completely different person. The room was dimly lit, adding an even more romantic atmosphere. Emma sat on the bed, gesturing for both men to join her. Kevin wasted no time leaning toward her, while Adam put his arm around her shoulders before beginning to kiss her. They spoke, but their words were drowned out by the pounding of Jacob's blood in his ears. He saw Emma smiling, her fingers trailing down Kevin's arm as she touched Adam as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Kevin also began gently kissing Emma, and she seemed to enjoy it. This was true betrayal. Jacob's patience snapped when he saw Kevin lean in and kiss Emma while Adam wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. His heart ached so much that he felt his legs begin to tremble. He couldn't watch the scene any longer. His hand gripped the door handle, and in an instant, he burst into the room. What the hell is going on here? Jacob shouted so loudly that the room fell silent. Emma jumped away from the men, her face pale. Adam and Kevin froze in place, as if someone had switched off their emotions. Jacob, what are you doing here? Emma sprang to her feet, her voice trembling. What am I doing here? Me? What are you doing, Emma? With them? Both of them at the same time? Jacob's voice rose as his hands trembled, his fists clenched. It's not what you think, she began, but Jacob cut her off. Not what I think. He laughed, but it was a bitter, cold laugh. I saw everything, Emma. Every touch, every look, every kiss. How could you? With him. He pointed at Kevin. And him? His fingers shifted to Adam. I, Emma stammered, her eyes filling with tears. It just happened. I didn't mean for this. Didn't mean for it? Jacob stepped forward, and Emma retreated as if he were a stranger. You didn't mean for this? You lied to me. You deceived me. I had my reasons, she shouted, trying to defend herself. You were always so busy. You were always somewhere else. So you decided to find comfort with them? Jacob pointed to the men, who still stood silently. Is that your excuse? I was lonely, Jacob. You don't understand. Her voice cracked, and she started sobbing. Lonely? Jacob exclaimed in anger. I worked to provide for us, to make sure you had everything, and this is what you chose instead? Emma collapsed to her knees, covering her face with her hands. Her sobs grew louder, but they didn't evoke any pity in Jacob. He turned his gaze to Adam and Kevin, who were still silent. And you too? Did you not think this was wrong? Seducing another man's wife? Do you even understand what respect is? Jacob, listen, Kevin began, but Jacob raised his hand to stop him. No, you listen. His voice was low but filled with fury. Get out of my house. Both of you. Now. Kevin and Adam exchanged glances. They knew arguing was pointless. Grabbing their things, they quickly left the room, avoiding Jacob's gaze. When the door closed behind them, Jacob looked at Emma, who was still crying on the floor. He no longer felt love for her, only betrayal and pain. Now you're alone, Emma, and maybe that's what you always wanted. His voice was quiet, but each word hit like a blow. Emma raised her head, her eyes red from crying. I didn't want this. Jacob, please, let me explain. You had your chance to explain, but instead, you chose to lie. He turned and left the room, leaving her there alone with her tears and guilt. Jacob paced the living room for a long time, trying to calm himself after what had happened. His heart was breaking, but his mind was already making decisions. He knew he couldn't live with Emma anymore after what he had seen. Gathering all his strength, he returned to the room where she sat curled up on the floor. Emma, get up, he said coldly, avoiding her gaze. Jacob, please. I know I was wrong, but we can fix this. Just give me a chance, she whispered, not raising her head. A chance? He looked at her with a bitter smile. You used up your chance when you decided to bring those two into our home. There's nothing to fix here. Pack your things. Emma lifted her head, her eyes wet with tears, but fear now appeared in her expression. What do you mean? You're leaving. There's no place for you in this house anymore, he said firmly. You can't do this. This is our home. Emma got to her feet, but Jacob raised his hand to stop her. This is the home I built for us. The home you betrayed. Now it's mine alone. Pack your things, and I want you out of here by morning. Emma tried to protest for a few more minutes, but her words were drowned out by Jacob's resolve. Eventually, she realized arguing was pointless. She silently went to the bedroom to gather her belongings, while Jacob remained in the living room, grappling with the whirlwind of emotions inside him. The next day, he filed for divorce. Deep down, he felt a sense of relief that he had finally put an end to this chapter. But at the same time, a bitterness lingered that he couldn't shake off. A few days passed. Jacob tried to return to his usual routine, but unexpectedly, one morning, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he saw Emma. She looked tired, but her eyes held something new, a mixture of fear and hope. In her hands, she held an envelope. What are you doing here? Jacob asked, trying to mask his irritation. "We need to talk," she said, handing him the envelope. "There's nothing to talk about, Emma. I've filed for divorce, and that's the end," he replied, but still took the envelope. "Please, just look at this, and then decide if you want to hear me out," she said softly. Jacob opened the envelope and saw a document. It was a medical report. It stated that Emma was pregnant, and the term was 1 month. He looked up at her, trying to understand what this meant. "What is this?" he asked, though he already had an idea. "I'm pregnant, Jacob," she replied, her voice trembling. "It happened recently. I found out after you threw me out." "Pregnant?" He stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. "And you want me to believe this is my child after everything that happened?" Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. I'm not sure, Jacob, but you need to know. I need to know whose child it is." Her words hit him like a blow. Jacob felt humiliated and enraged. But a part of him, despite everything, couldn't just leave the situation unresolved. "Fine," he said after a long pause. "We'll do a test. And if it's not my child, I never want to see you again." Emma nodded. They agreed to undergo the procedure to establish paternity. The weeks of waiting were a real trial for Jacob. He felt angry, frustrated, but also deeply conflicted. What would he do if the child turned out to be his? Finally, the day arrived when they received the results. In the doctor's office, Jacob silently read the report while Emma sat beside him, barely holding back tears. The conclusion was clear. It wasn't his child. "I knew it," Jacob said, putting the papers down. "I knew it wasn't mine." "Jacob, listen. I know I've ruined everything, but I can't go through this alone. Please, don't leave me now." His face was filled with emotion, anger, disappointment, but also pity. He looked at her sitting there, so vulnerable. He didn't want anything more to do with this woman, but at the same time, he couldn't completely abandon her. "Fine," he said at last, exhaling deeply. "I'll let you come back. But it's not because I've forgiven you. It's for the child's sake. You need a safe place to stay." Emma began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. Jacob knew the road ahead would not be easy, but deep down, he hoped that somehow he could find peace and make this decision work. What would you do in Jacob's place? Would you take Emma back or leave everything in the past? Share your thoughts in the comments.